Good morning and welcome everybody to the Joint Committee on Program Open Space and Agricultural Land Preservation. I am Senator Sarah Elfreth, representing Senate District 30 here with my co-chair, Delegate Robin Lewis. And we are doing our annual check-in, fall September check-in with all the three agencies that help make both of these programs not just function, but succeed. And so this is the start of the conversations for the legislative session. A lot of brainstorming is going to happen today. I'm proud to be joined by two of our members from the Senate, Senator Mike McKay, Senator Jason Gallion. And on our agenda today, which should be posted on the MGA website, we will be hearing from Department of Natural Resources, Department of Agriculture, and Department of Planning. Then we're going to have a bit of a discussion amongst the committee. And we will announce our next meeting date, which is December 11th. Mark your calendars to follow up on anything discussed today. And again, prepare for the 2025 legislative session. And with that, I'll turn it over to the House Chair, Delegate Lewis.
Thank you, Senator Elfreth. And good morning, everyone. Thanks to everyone for joining us, folks in the public, and all of our esteemed colleagues here in the Zoom room today. I'm Delegate Robin Lewis, representing District 46 in Baltimore City. And I look forward to hearing updates from Department of Planning, Department of Natural Resources, and the Department of the Environment. The work that you all do is so important, and we love hearing your updates and making plans to keep working with you effectively to serve the people of Maryland. And with that, I will hand it back to our Senate Chair. And I'll just mention, if there are any delegate members of the Joint Committee, I'm not seeing any, so I'm representing the House for the moment. Thank you.
Wonderful. So we have, last year we started this tradition. I hope it sticks. Instead of just a broad-based update on the programs themselves, POS and MALF, we have asked the departments to focus in on how those programs help the state meet our ambitious goals, whether they are reforestation goals, public water access goals, tree canopy goals, how all of this kind of fits together in terms of our larger state priorities. So that's what we've asked the secretaries and departments to focus on today. I'm really excited for this update. And with that, I will turn it over to Secretary Josh Kurtz and his team at DNR to give us their update and overview.
Great. Thank you all very much. It's a pleasure to see you all today. And I think, DNR is going to start, then we'll go to Department of Agriculture and the Department of Planning. Thank you, Andrew, for pulling up the slides. We're looking forward to having this conversation, continuing on some of the discussions from last year. And so, as you can see here, this is the agenda for what DNR is going to cover. We'll talk through the status of a few different pieces of legislation that we've been working on that directly relate to land protection and to reforestation goals. We'll talk about program open space, take a little bit deeper of a dive into the state and local side, talk about fund balances, give you a few other updates related to our management of our lands. And then we're going to end with a couple of questions that we have been posing internally that I wanted to pose back to you all as the Joint Committee, really things that we're wrestling with and noodling on. If you go to the next slide, please, Andrew. So we'll start with recent legislation that was passed. First with the Tree Solutions Now Act. So just to kind of reorient everybody, this established the goal of 5 million trees by 2031 with 10% in underserved communities. You can see the numbers that we've hit along the way. But I think the most important part of this slide is the increased rate that we're seeing year in and year out. And I think that is directly related to the focus of our department and the focus of our sister agencies of building partnerships and building the capacity, getting the word out to landowners. We're getting a ton of help from that, from Department of Planning, Department of Agriculture, our soil conservation districts, really helping get the word out about tree plantings in rural, urban, and suburban areas. And so what we are seeing is that continued uptick and rate. We feel bullish that we're going to meet the goal set forward, or meet that goal by 2031, which is what's set in statute. I think just one thing that I wanted to point out here when it comes to the urban trees piece, because this was really the big shift that this legislation created for us. And it was the ability to fund the development, the kind of rebuilding of the sites for planting, as well as long-term maintenance. That has been a real challenge in the tree planting space. That long-term maintenance of the trees, they need additional watering, they need protection from pests. So I think that has allowed us to be more successful. But really, the focus here, because we're planting primarily on private property, is the build out of those partnerships. And I think local governments have really been on the forefront of that. We did an incredibly large planting in Sykesville recently. And so I think we'll continue to see this increase rate because we have the partnership infrastructure now set for Tree Solutions Now Act. If you go to the next slide, please, Andrew. And so the next slide is a bill from last year, which altered the timelines and gave us greater procurement exemption. So as you can see, it's up to 400,000. And really what the focus of this legislation was to make sure that we can spend this money as effectively as possible and that we can work through a prioritized list of all of the critical maintenance needs that we had. As you all know, and one of the main reasons for this bill was that critical maintenance backlog that had built up over the years. And I think a couple things that have changed internally, we've done some significant restructuring in our procurement department. We have centralized our procurement function, and we've really rebuilt and restaffed our financial team. We've also been able, we now with the expanded procurement exemption, this is going to allow us to move several projects. When we look at those projects, they kind of fall into rough buckets, 200,000 and less, 200,000 to 400,000, 500,000, and then our larger scale projects, which really are the like $1 million, $2 million, $3 million significant critical maintenance projects. So this October 1, we are going to be ready to start moving on with a higher procurement exemption up to 400,000. The team has focused in. We've created a procurement review group internally at DNR, and so we have prepared to put out several RFPs in the critical maintenance space up to around that $400,000 mark. We have, as you know, a massive backlog, and at the same time a growing need for more critical maintenance. Our Park Service properties were developed, in the 70s, 80s, in the 90s. And what we're seeing now is that infrastructure starting to degrade. So what we're doing is really digging into that critical maintenance, but also we've gone to a regional approach for our land managers. That isn't just Park Service, Forest Service, and Wildlife and Heritage working separately. It's working together. And what we're doing is we're able to actually bundle and package projects that are going on to not only get a better deal, frankly, for the state of Maryland, but allow us to move more quickly.
Can you please ask them what they want me to do?
Mr.
Hey, thank you very much. Sorry.
No problem. If you could go to the next slide, please, Andrew. Oh, sorry, I missed the last thing I wanted to touch on. One of the things that we did with this bill is we realigned our long-term and our comprehensive planning for the parks and our long-term land protection strategic plan so that they're actually happening at the same time. And the reason we did that is we felt that it was counterproductive to be looking at our comprehensive long-term plan for the Park Service from a management perspective, and at the same time building our long-term protection and acquisition strategy. And so by delaying that a year, it allowed us to align those two strategic plans together. And we have a contractor, we're under contract with a contractor who's going to do the updates of both plans together. It's an organization that worked really closely with the department and the Department of Legislative Services for the GMOA, the Parks plan, or the Park Service analysis. So a well-resourced entity that has a great amount of experience here in Maryland. Next slide, please, Andrew. So continuing on the conversation about the Great Maryland Outdoors Act, again, I think this is, if not the greatest, one of the greatest investments in our parks. And I think that the timing of this coming out of COVID, we're still seeing that 20 million plus visitorship in our parks and across our public lands. And the Great Maryland Outdoors Act, it focused in on our comprehensive long-term strategic plan. It really boosted our ability to hire. And I think that's the place where we're very close to releasing, I think, 67 new pins for hiring within the Park Service. And we're approaching that through a few different lenses. The first is one of the challenges that we have from a management of our public lands is that we went to a park complex system over time. And so basically what that means is you take several parks and have one park management unit or park management team that manages those large areas. So like a Tuckahoe, a Gunpowder, a Southern Maryland Recreational Complex. All across the state, we have these larger complexes that are really difficult. And, I think I was talking to the Tuckahoe park manager, and if you get up in the morning in the northern part of Tuckahoe and you drive from the northern end to the southern end and all you do is unlock and check gates, that's a 10-hour day. And that's not engaging with the public. It's not ensuring that our facilities are safe and adequate. It's not providing that public service that people expect from the Maryland Park Service. And it's not giving us a robust experience for the Maryland citizens and visitors to our parks. And so we're going to be breaking up those complexes. We're centralizing some really key functions, including our planning team. And that is going to actually align directly to our ability to meet that critical maintenance goal and ensure that we aren't building these massive backlogs. So a larger team focused regionally on ensuring that we're tackling the problems as they come up rather than not having enough people to move those projects forward. We've got two incredible new parks, the Port of Deposit and Freedman State Historic Park. We have the advisory committees, which are actively meeting. Port of Deposit, we have a report that's going to be coming out the end of this year. We've had several meetings with that advisory committee over the past several months. That is a challenging site, but one that has an incredible history and an incredibly diverse history, whether that be Snow Hill, the history of the African American community there, the Navy site that is part of Port Deposit. And when you look at the long-term plan for the town of Port Deposit, the ability for us to have a functioning park has the potential to directly contribute to the economic development of the town. And I think that a really exciting opportunity for us to really integrate Port Deposit, the state park with the town. And I want to thank Senator Gallion, who I saw on the call earlier, for his participation and for taking us up there and for showing us around. I think that was really helpful for Dylan and I. And then we have the Parks and Recreation Committee, which was created by the Great Maryland Outdoors Act. We had the first meeting in the spring. We have a fall meeting coming up. And really the focus of that is continuing to incorporate the recommendations of the DLS report, talk through some of the sticky pieces of the Park Service management, and I think really help us just continue to move into that next generation of park management. Next slide, please, Andrew. So the Maryland the Beautiful Act, this really created the two important goals of conserving 30% of our state lands by 2030 and 40% by 2040. We have met the 30% goal. We did at the end of last calendar year. And I think that's really important because, frankly, the 30 to 40 piece is going to be a challenge. I think that we've plucked a lot of the larger pieces of land off the landscape that were good for access, great for natural resource protection. And now what we're looking at is by and large smaller parcels, more distributed, and parcels in more urbanized areas. I think one of the things that we've seen, from not just legislative mandates, but we've heard from Maryland citizens and constituents is they want to have greater access to green space in their communities. And so I think that a really important piece of Maryland the Beautiful Act is to continue to grow and expand those partnerships. Rural Legacy is, I think, a fantastic example of grassroots land protection, and continuing to lean into our partnerships with nonprofit land trusts, with local governments, with federal government is the only way that we're going to get to 40%. Another opportunity we have is just continuing to expand our use of easements, of permanent protection of property that is not necessarily owned by the state. So we're really, I think, excited about the opportunities continuing to move forward, but also recognize that the difference between 30 and 40 is going to be much more challenging than the difference between 20 and 30. Another piece of legislation that was passed recently created a framework for creating a partnership park in Gwent Falls, and the Great Maryland Outdoors Act gave us authorizing a statute to be able to do partnership parks. And so this was a piece of legislation that was put forward in the House last year to create that partnership park in Gwent Falls. We've had really good conversations and really good meetings with Baltimore City. We had their whole leadership team came down on August 5th. And we're continuing that process. And I think one of the things that's really important about this process, and we heard loud and clear during the legislative process, was the importance of us talking to and understanding the needs of the communities and the neighborhoods that surround Gwynn Falls. And so we're planning with the city a series of charrettes and listening sessions to ensure that whatever this partnership park, whatever shape it takes, is something that is going to have wide support from the communities around it and going to provide greater benefit. One of the things that we have heard kind of in some of our early discussions and some of the early outreach from communities is the need to focus on public safety. And I completely understand and agree. I think one thing I wanted to flag for you all, and I think is important, is that our park rangers are not law enforcement. So they do not have law enforcement capacity. They are civilian rangers. And so the way that we would need to evaluate this is more of a natural resource police presence rather than increased park service because they don't have that law enforcement capacity. Just wanted to flag that for you all as we continue to have these conversations because that was something we have been hearing from the community. So I guess to the chairs, do you want me to run through all of these and then take questions, or I can take questions with legislation, program open space? Do you want me to do it in chunks? How would you like to handle this?
Mr. I think that's a good place to pause, and I appreciate that Chair Lewis and I asked you to front load what's like the most recent legislation and how it all is relevant to program open space, and the same thing for Department of Ag and Department of Planning. So yes, let's pause. That was a whole lot of progress in legislation. Pause for any questions folks may have.
If I may, Madam Senate Chair.
Please.
Thank you. So thanks very much for that overview. Can I just salute you for achieving the Maryland the Beautiful Act land conservation goal of 30%. 7 years early. I think that is worth a pat on the back to everyone involved. Really wonderful. As someone who's planted hundreds of urban street trees, I salute tree planters statewide. Thank you. I also appreciated your flagging, Mr. Secretary, the importance of focus to get from that 30% preliminary goal to that final 40% goal. And you mentioned that one of the strategies is investing in partnerships. We do have a partnership model already unfolding with Gwynn Falls. I just wonder what you might say about the value of partnerships or the potential for partnerships to help us go from 30% to 40% land conservation. And you also mentioned easements, and I wonder if you had any thoughts of how we could help to support you in moving the needle from 30
Yeah, I think when we think about partnerships, I'll take the first piece and then we'll do easement second. I think the partnerships, what's exciting about the partnerships we're seeing is we're kind of, maybe I'd call them like two broad buckets. One is partnerships around managing the land. One of the hurdles for us can be, not having the internal capacity or the ability with existing staff to be able to take on new land, especially in counties or in jurisdictions where we don't already have existing land bases, right? So, Baltimore City, Wycomico County, neither of those two jurisdictions have a state park. And one of the hurdles to putting state parks in those places is we don't have staff in those spaces. And I think the ability for us to do some of this management and partnership, and I think Gwynn Falls is a great example of that, working with the city, but working with local governments, working with land trust and other land managers to create that partnership of management is really important. I think a second part to that partnership is the actual acquisition piece. We have a fantastic staff at land acquisition and planning who are out there meeting with people, pounding the pavement, working through deals. I mean, a wide range of different aspects of that acquisition. But acquiring land oftentimes is about having personal relationships with people. Early in my career, I spent time on the Eastern Shore doing land acquisition, and you sat, at the little roadhouse in Vienna, you grabbed people when they were on their lunch, and it's about building relationships in communities and building trust. And I think that's something that our land trust community can really help us with. They're embedded in communities. They know landowners who are maybe, you know, interested in maybe they know that they're a duck hunter, right? And they want to do an easement on their property and do some restoration work that's going to benefit water quality and allow them to hunt more ducks. You know, that's something that having people embedded in these communities and allows us to then be successful in terms of doing some of these acquisition and deploying things like easements. So I think from a partnership perspective, it's management partners and acquisition partners, both equally important. But the more we can continue to scale those up, the more successful we're going to be in getting to that 40% goal. And then easements, I think, a really unique opportunity, right? Because it allows us to work directly again with landowners. You know, what do you want to see out of that property long term? And what we're seeing oftentimes, you know, I think it's over 80% of our forested land is in remaining forested land is in private ownership. You know, talking to those landowners, one of the things we've seen, and this has been a big shift over the past 10 years, historically, we had seen people kept it in forests in case they had a medical emergency. It was the piggy bank, right? It was the savings plan. And now what we're seeing is a shift towards people wanting to do more, you know, more actual recreation in those spaces, their own trails, hunting opportunities, wildlife viewing. And easements give us the opportunity to not only permanently protect that for the resource value for the rest of the state, but allow them to help them build out a plan so they can manage that properly, effectively for the things that they want to see long term. And I think that those things are critically important. And I also, when we talk about easements, you know, the Department of Agriculture is doing a fantastic job in the easement space, protecting farmland, keeping farmland as farmland. You know, I think that is also a really key component here. It's working with our working lands, whether that be forests, farms, to ensure that they're permanently protected. They get that financial benefit, but they're also still able to continue using those properties for you know, what they are currently being used for. So I think easements give us an opportunity to be really flexible with or work closely and give flexibility to the landowners to amplify the benefits they want to get out of those spaces.
Thank you.
Okay. Seeing no further questions, Mr. Secretary, keep going.
All right. All right, so we'll talk about program open space, and we'll start with, we've got two parts of program open space, state side funding and local side funding, and we're going to talk about state side first. So I wanted to highlight a few different projects. Andrew, if you could pull the slides up for me. I wanted to highlight 4 different projects of acquisitions that we did recently because they're really unique in different ways. And I really think starting with Holly Beach, that was an opportunity for the state to take on a property that had been managed by a nonprofit for years. And frankly, is an incredible opportunity for us to have in an ownership perspective. We acquired it. It is over 5 miles of shoreline. You know, we don't have those kind of opportunities very often. So we're very excited about that one. It's going to give us a really unique opportunity to trial run some climate resilience projects out there, really help us demonstrate the importance of some of the subtidal and intertidal work that we can do in our state parks and the benefits that they can create for the communities behind them. So Holly Beach Farm is a spit of land that you see when you're coming from the eastern shore back over the bay, and it's protecting a large number of communities behind it. Also provides a really unique opportunity in that there's a freshwater pond in the critical area. That's very rare in the state of Maryland. And so we're excited about that. We're just starting to really activate this space. Our first round of duck hunting is happening this fall. So that's just starting to open up, but one that we're really excited about and is going to help us. I think when we think about our ability to demonstrate and ground truth some of these resilience opportunities. We have the Gunpowder Falls acquisition, you know, again, adding to contiguous pieces, really being able to expand and create more recreational opportunities in areas where there are a significant amount of individuals. You know, the Cecil County property, being able to expand our state forests. You know, when we talk a lot about our public lands, most people think about our state parks. But That's about a third of the land that we have under management. And how we activate our state forests and our wildlife management areas has to be different because they have a different, statutory requirement for what we're managing for. But they do create a really good opportunity for additional passive recreation and a really good opportunity for us to kind of take some of the pressure from some of our state properties that are very well loved and maybe overly loved at times. And then the Artmore property in Allegheny County, I think we're really excited about this because it actually unlocks a larger property of Wills Mountain State Park that's behind it. And it's going to allow us to just significantly increase the recreational opportunities right outside of Cumberland. And, Wills Mountain, I would argue, is one of the best view sheds in the entire state of Maryland. It's almost a 360-degree view. You can look up into Pennsylvania, down into Cumberland, along the Potomac Valley into West Virginia. It's a stunning property. There are some significant rare and threatened endangered species there. So we're working on a management plan for that. And it's also one of the premier rock climbing spaces in Maryland. So an opportunity for us to think about the indirect economic value that we can bring for the city of Cumberland. There is an emerging and a fairly large, frankly, climbing community there. There are several outfitters. Wheels Up is one we partner with at Rocky Gap that are going to be able to benefit from these additional recreational opportunities, more people coming to Cumberland to hike and to climb. So we're excited about that one. We're working through, it's also going to be a bit of a challenge because there's some contamination issues there because it was a plastic factory. We're working through that with Department of the Environment right now. And I think feel really good about where we are with that property. So that's just a couple of projects I wanted to highlight on state side. Moving to the program open space local side. This again funded with the transfer tax. And really this goes to our local parks. This goes to the parks that, our community members are spending their time in, softball, soccer, basketball, tennis. When you think about that community asset, that green space in your community, that's program open space local. This is a space that frankly is really fun. We have great conversations with our local governments. We have a very strong partnership with our local governments here. And so we're able to help them permanently protect their properties and meet the goals that they have for acquisition and for recreation. One thing I will flag though, just like we struggle with the ability to protect our lands and then manage them, the locals do as well. And so we're working to figure out how we can better support that, within program open space, but also how we can connect them into some of the partnerships that we referenced before. If you want to move to the next one, Andrew. And so we're going to kind of switch back to stateside here and really what we wanted to talk about, and we discussed this a little bit last year, but really is the size of the balance and kind of how we got here. And I think it's really important to understand when we have a hot real estate market, we are bringing a significant amount of money into the fund. And we have a hot real estate market. It's hard for us to do acquisition because, we get appraisals and we stick within the confines of those appraisals. We aren't, going above and beyond like somebody in the private sector could do, right? You can, we're not just coming in and saying, well, waive the inspection, cash on hand, 20% over ask, that's a private sector thing. And so it makes it so that we build up these really large fund balances while at the same time not having as many opportunities to do that acquisition. So what we have been really working to do is line up that pipeline. So as that fund balance grows, we're lining up projects through partnerships. We're lining up projects with local governments, et cetera, that we can then move over the next several years. And so what you see is that we've got 150 million unencumbered. 159 was authorized in 23 and 24 because of that, again, hot real estate market. But we've changed the way that we build our pipeline. We're up to 100 projects over $115 million. So we're changing the way that we operate internally. We also were able to really staff up on the real estate transaction side. So we have 2 additional real estate attorneys to the Office of the Attorney General, which really important, right? Whenever you're closing on a piece of property, that's really where the rubber hits the road, and they're giving us greater capacity to do these acquisitions. Next slide, please, Andrew. And then I also just wanted to show the local unencumbered balance, 140 million, 171, again, very high numbers in 23 and 24. Again, this is the historic opportunity from the really hot real estate market we've seen. We are moving really quickly through this, but I think one thing that's important to point out is the local parks and playground infrastructure funding. This is a very, very popular program. It's allowed us to invest in a wide range of things, and I think things that maybe I didn't really think about as much, but like lighting systems so that people can activate these spaces and use them more regularly. Bathrooms. I mean, one of the biggest things we talk about with our local government partners and colleagues is how much a good amount of infrastructure they need to really activate some more of these spaces. There's a rail trail by my house. It's fantastic, but there's no bathroom along it. We actually, I think the Program Open Space Local has funded a bathroom for Anne Arundel County at another part of that rail trail that's going to allow it to be more usable and more user friendly. And then ADA compliant. A lot of the work that we're doing through LPPI and through Program Open Space Local is creating more opportunities for people who may be wheelchair bound to access our parks, and building in amenities that throughout the park that allow them to be able to have greater access. So I think that's some places we've seen a lot of continued engagement. And we also have these long-term plans. So our county, like we do a long-term acquisition and planning and plans. The counties and the locals are doing that as well. And so that also helps us line up where the funding that's currently unencumbered can go. And so I know that there's, with those two fund balances, I think this is another good place to pause, Madam Chairs. So if there are questions about this, be happy to take them before we move into kind of other updates.
So, Mr. Secretary, what I hear you saying, reading between the lines, is we were benefited from a very hot real estate market. As we all know, interest rates went back up. They're coming back down slightly, but we're going to have to readjust some of our expectations, and certainly our local partners have to as well. I do have a question if no one wants to add on to that. Okay, so my question is, appreciating your rethinking of the pipeline, I think is so incredibly important. So we are not constantly reacting to opportunities, but rather being thoughtful and strategic about the opportunities that the state invests taxpayer money in. Can you speak a little bit about, broadly what you look for? What are some factors of an ideal property? Just so, we can start to brainstorm, we can share with our constituents. We're not just grabbing anything that's available. What is an ideal piece of property for you to preserve?
Yeah. I think first and foremost, how accessible is it? What are the transportation options that these facilities and these sites have? What existing infrastructure is there, whether that be parking, whether that be plumbing, whether that be facilities that people could stay overnight at? I think those are areas where we see a really strong demand from our constituencies. I think so those are really key. We have to think about how we activate these properties, right? We are acquiring these properties for all Marylanders. So we need these properties to not only contribute to the many goals that we have, whether that be clean water, clean air, wildlife and habitat protection, but also for the use of people. And so I think, really thinking about that transportation piece is key. We've been working closely with MDOT on that as well. For us from a perspective of management too, we're also always looking to close the in holdings. So if you look at many of our properties, we acquire a chunk here and then a chunk there, and now we've got a big area in the middle that is privately held. So we're always looking for in holdings from an ability for us to manage those properties more effectively. That's an important, I think, caveat that we're looking at and factor we're looking at. I think an emerging opportunity for us too is looking at properties that have very high restoration capacity or ability. We know that, where we look at the Chesapeake Bay restoration, we have a lot of work to do there, whether that be through plantings, wetland restoration. I think we're also really taking a harder look at how the capacity these properties have for restoration, whether that be for water quality, habitat. Again, thinking about and building in the idea of what this project could be, not necessarily just what it is right now. And that's a pretty substantial shift. And I think that is really reflective of the fact that, we got the really good pieces in that first 20 to 30%. We're still after those fantastic. We're running everything through our targeted ecological areas layer, but also thinking about how we can contribute by building more very robust ecological areas. So a wide range. I know that's maybe not as focused as you were looking for, but I think those are some of like the key criteria we're looking at, and they're going to look different depending on the jurisdiction that we're in.
I think it's a perfect answer. We're a diverse state and with different needs in different parts of the state. So certainly climate resilience is important to my part of the state, but transportation is equally important to others. So very much appreciate that. Okay. And Mr. Secretary, I think your final few slides.
Yep. And so I've touched on this a little bit, but I just wanted to put a bit of a finer point on the demand for our land preservation programs. And I think, the one thing I also wanted to highlight too is some of the new tools we have, like the Green Space Equity Program. The ability for us to really look at and do some of that, to your point, Senator Elfreth, that forward-looking targeting in terms of where we are lacking green space, I think is something that we're really excited about. Our team has worked really closely with the Department of Planning to create those map layers and also build the advisory committee that's going to allow us to build partnerships in these communities and really drive forward a more equitable protection plan, especially in our urban communities. So I think that is a space that we're really excited. We're seeing greater demand for preservation in our urban cores, and I think having that new tool is really important. The other piece of this too is I wanted to touch on Rural Legacy. Rural Legacy program is fantastic and it is different than our other land protection programs in that it's a competitive process. It's a competitive grant program. And so this allows us to really work with these local sponsors. And again, I think that gets us back to this concept of partnership in acquisition and in management. And the program is incredibly popular and successful. And this year we saw the expansion of 2 of our rural legacy areas and a designation of a new one. And I think the Bishop Shoalville rural legacy area is also really important because when you look at what's happening in terms of the sprawl development just across the border in Delaware, we really need to protect and preserve our farmland on our side of the border from a water quality perspective. And so that new area is going to be really important for us. I think the other thing too, I just wanted to point to in the local side, when we look at the Parks and Rec plans, that's a $2 billion number for acquisition. So while we have what looks to be a rather large fund balance, it's a fraction of what has been identified by our local partners. And so, the demand for land preservation is very high. Our goals are very high. And I think the fund balance is misleading in that it is so large. But we have really lined up. I think when you look at the tree planting kind of as a corollary, we've really tried to build that human infrastructure to be able to move these funds and these projects more effectively, and that's how we're really looking to move forward with drawing down that fund balance in a way that again really amplifies our ability to give access to Marylanders to these properties. If you go to the next slide, please, Andrew. And the next is just a little bit deeper detail on the long-term plans that we're working on. And just also wanted to highlight, and I touched on this a little bit earlier, the importance of the county level plans too. We're going to take all 3 of these, the Land Preservation Recreation Plan, the Comprehensive Long-Term Strategic Plan, and the county's Land Preservation Parks and Recreation Plan. It's a lot of L's and P's and R's. And really marry them. And I think that is really where the strength comes because we're acquiring and we're protecting properties that are providing a cascading level of benefit, whether that be, benefit for Marylanders who want to go to a state park, benefit to Marylanders or farmers who want to have access to farmland, to county level, to people who want to be able to go to more dog parks. And so we're trying to think about these things more holistically. And I think, frankly, the engine that is our local and municipal parks departments and planning departments really is just so key to all of this. And I think we feel very strongly about the partnerships that that frankly the department has had for many, many years, but that we've been able to continue to steward. And then the last slide I have is just wanted to touch on land preservation in the Chesapeake Bay. And one of the things that we see in the Chesapeake Bay Agreement was that conservation is a high priority. It's a lot more effective to protect something that is functioning from a water quality and an ecosystem perspective than it is to try to restore it somewhere else. And so conservation really is a core element to the Bay Agreement. We are just on the cusp of that 30% of the Bay watershed protected. We're going to continue to strive to ensure that we're meeting that goal in the short term. We're very, very close. But we also, think about that through the lens of not only water quality, but balancing that with the recreational opportunities. And I think an interesting thing here is we hear a lot about how we have very limited access to water, and that's true. And those waterfront spaces are really important for water quality. And so having a strategy that marries both of those and allows for increasing that access to the water while also at the same time allowing us for more restoration opportunity and protecting those really critical spaces, those buffers, those stream beds. We are working to do both of those things hand in hand. And then again, the CREP easement program, another fantastic program we work with Department of Ag on. And, we recently had that program expanded statewide. I think we're really excited about that. Again, another space we're continuing to grow the pipeline. CREP easements are really, really valuable for that. So that is my last slide. I have one more. That's my last upstate slide. I had one that is really a brainstorming slide that I just wanted to kind of flag for you all. If you go one more, please, Andrew. And I think these are just really, staffing rates is a challenge. And I think, Great Maryland Outdoors Act really highlighted the need for that, brought us back to the reality of where we are today in terms of the lands that we manage. But we are going to acquire more lands. And so thinking about long-term, how we find that balance between acquiring lands and having adequate personnel to manage them is going to be critical. And then, a couple of things we've kind of touched on today, but how do we balance this program open space fund balances in the real estate market? How can we be more proactive? I think is really important. Another thing that, we've been looking at from a funding for the Park Service perspective and for our land management perspective is, what do other land management entities do? And one thing we've seen at the national park level is the success of their National Park Foundation. And so we're thinking about how could we bring a model like that to Maryland, where philanthropic dollars really contribute to our successful management of these spaces. And then, how do we mitigate the impacts of climate change and invasive species on land managed by the department? We talked about the importance of waterfront. We're actively losing land in some of our most popular parks, Point Lookout being one, right, because of the impact of sea level rise. And then how do we better support local governments in terms of meeting their land conservation goals? And I would add a little bit of more of color to that. How do we help them with their management goals too? So I would say these are some of the bigger, stickier kind of topics that we at the department are currently kind of noodling on and would love to continue dialogue with you all around and try to come up with some really robust and long-term solutions for.
Okay, thank you. I think everybody needs to take another sip of coffee so we can, I'm not the only person asking questions here. Thank you, Mr. Secretary and your team. You're welcome to stay if you would like, but we appreciate all the work that you have. And we'll, of course, have some follow-ups based on some of the brainstorm during the discussion. Then we look forward to working with you and meeting again on December 11th.
Great. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Okay, next up, we have the wonderful team at Department of Agriculture. And Secretary Addix, we're so thrilled that you were able to join us today. I know you're on one screen, your team is in another screen, but we're excited to have you and talk about how we are preserving agricultural land and helping to meet all of our wonderful statewide goals when it comes to agriculture. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that very much. I'm managing or dealing with spotty Wi-Fi in an otherwise dark hotel, so I'm up against a window in a very rainy Indianapolis at a conference. So thank you for tolerating any glitches that may come. The team is all back in the conference room, and we'll be able to roll through the presentation. But before we get started, Madam Chairs and committee members and staff, just wanted to give a little bit of overview about what we've been doing regarding preservation, and then we'll get to the topic at hand, which is small minority and women-owned business involvement in agriculture. But first and foremost, MALF has preserved just this year alone 14,000 acres via 102 easements with a $64 million outlay. That's nearly twice as many properties as last year, and what that shows is that we're being more efficient. We're moving further, faster. Michelle Cable and her team are on to answer any questions specifically about preservation. But the cumulative number, 370,000 acres preserved through the Maryland Ag Land Preservation Foundation, MALF. And that comes with the dollar sign of $972 million. So when you think about what we've been able to accomplish, it's great. What Secretary Kurtz was mentioning, that the more you preserve, the harder it gets to preserve. We're not quite at that point yet. There's a whole bunch of interest in folks adding their properties to this program, but we do anticipate over time that it will get more difficult and frankly a little bit more expensive to preserve the properties, but it is by all means the right thing to do. Our topic of the day, small minority women-owned business involvement in agriculture. So you'll hear from Cassie Shirk, our Assistant Secretary of Animal Health and Marketing and Food Quality, to tell us a couple of things. The first is we'll hear about Ag Census and actual numbers from USDA's National Ag Statistics Service, and that's where we rely for information about who's actually farming. We've got anecdotal data. We know who's involved in our programs, but every number of years, USDA sends out a survey, and it's quite a detailed survey. We do a lot of assistance helping people fill out and complete that survey. At the conference where I'm currently attending, we just heard this morning about USDA's new metrics and new things that they'll be asking in upcoming surveys. So they are trying to keep up with what's really happening on the ground, especially in a really diverse state like Maryland, where it's not just a grain state. We'll also hear about our local food purchase assistance cooperative agreement. We're getting into acronym soup here, LFPA. Then MFARM, Maryland Food and Agricultural Resilience Mechanism Grant, FMNP, which is our Farmers Market Nutrition Program, RFSI, Resilient Food System Infrastructure. So that's where we're providing grants to try to build out our processing and storage infrastructure so that as we grow, we'll be able to process that food for use in school lunches, for use in the food system at different times of year. And then finally, one that does not have an acronym, the Small Farm and Urban Agriculture Program, which is through our Resource Conservation Office. So Hans Schmidt is here to discuss that if there are any questions. And then some other things that are just generally on our mind, and Secretary Kurtz gave a nod to this, and land access is one. The idea that there are folks who have land historically, third, fifth, seventh, eighth generation of families who have land, and there are folks who want to farm who do not have that heritage, that history. They do not benefit from their great-great-grandparents or their waybacks getting a land grant from England, right? So how do we find ways to provide access to folks who need to be able to farm? They want to farm. And in many cases, we're talking about folks from our underserved and minority populations who want to grow things that they know from their cultural heritage back home that just is not available here, but they know how to grow it. They just need land to grow it. And so DNR has been great at providing new formats and vehicles for folks to access parcels of land that meet a small farmer need better than maybe their prior leases did, which were for the larger commodity crops, year-to-year leases. For these smaller farmers, they're interested in growing food, and sometimes growing food takes 2, 3, 4 years. Some are perennial crops, and so it's a commitment that they need maybe a 5-year lease, and DNR has been great about reformatting the leases and finding new ways to do it. And then finally, I'll say that we're excited on October 10th to begin the rollout of a brand new conservation program that will do many things, but the one thing that it's meant to do is And I will say that it's based on a concept that Senator Elfreth developed last year called the best in show concept. And the whole concept is we have farmers who we understand want to do the right thing. And frankly, we have been telling them what the right things are, and those things that have been a mix of voluntary and have been some of them have been mandatory. Then comes along a Caesar report last year from the Bay program, which says those things that you've been doing, yeah, they're good, but they might not be good enough. There are other things that you need to be doing to move conservation forward. And so that research is out there, but it may not be in our current models. Those programs, those practices are available to farmers, but maybe they're not incentivized to try some of these new things because our programs and DNR and MDE and other state agency requirements are based on more longitudinal and what does EPA accredit and what does USDA accredit. And so we need to try new things. So this program will, we hope, help with not only land access, but a whole bunch of the other things that I just mentioned, and some that I didn't, including conservation, but climate, environment, saltwater intrusion, the concerns that communities have about farming within their communities. Think in some cases poultry industry or living near a dairy farm. How can we better involve the community in research, new practices that can get us to a really good place? So with that, I would turn it over to Cassie Shirk if we can pull that slide deck back up, and I will remain on if there are any questions, but I defer to our expert panel who has solid Wi-Fi.
Great. Thank you, Secretary. So as the Secretary mentioned, the committee had asked us to discuss small minority and women-owned business in agriculture. And the first thing that we just wanted to highlight was the Census of Agriculture, which is conducted by USDA's National Agricultural Statistics Service. It's conducted every 5 years. It was most recently conducted in 22. And this census looks at land use and ownership, operator characteristics, production practices, income and expenditures. And just, the committee can read through the slide, but one thing that I wanted to highlight on this slide in particular was that we have 224 farms out of 12,550 that are Black owned and operated and generated $9.6 million in sales. Next slide, please. Thank you. On this slide, we have a breakdown of Native American, Asian, and Hispanic Latinx farms in Maryland and their sales. Next slide, please. We have over 7,500 women farm operators here in Maryland, and they average over 100 acres. Next slide, please. And with regard to small farmers in Maryland, I wanted to highlight that a little over 2,000 Maryland farms operate on less than 10 acres. And we have some additional statistics there from the census for you to see. Thank you. Next, we want to talk about some of our marketing programs. And, all of our MDA marketing programs are open to everybody, but there are a few specifically that we wanted to highlight that are designed to support small minority and women-owned businesses in agriculture. And as the Secretary said, the first one, our Local Food Purchasing Assistance Cooperative Agreement Program, we refer to it as the LFPA program. It is funded by the USDA, and we were provided with $6.1 million for 2023 and 2024 to fund the purchase of local food from Maryland farmers and watermen. And these grants were directly distributed from MDA to the Maryland Food Bank and the Capital Area Food Bank. Small farmers, minority producers, and urban farmers have benefited directly from the food bank purchases with the LFPA funding. Next slide, please. And we have some additional information on this slide about the LFPA program. Next slide, Andrew. And we just wanted to highlight a quote from one of the farmers that have been a part of this program.
And Cassie, if I could jump in very quickly with this quote, this farmer is actually operating on one of these new DNR leases.
Thank you. All right, we can move on to the next slide, please. Up next, we have our M-Farm program, which is the Maryland Food and Agricultural Resiliency Grant Program. And this program is really intended to help Marylanders who face food insecurity and access to healthy food, while also providing a market for farmers to directly sell their products. This grant program allows Maryland food banks, charitable emergency food providers, and some nonprofits to request funding to purchase and process surplus, seasonal, or contractual agricultural and seafood products that are listed in our certified local farm and fish program and deliver them to Maryland families in need throughout the year. This year, we had 8 nonprofits receive $200,000 in grants, including 3 that we've highlighted on this slide. Recipients of these grants were programs represented from the Eastern Shore all the way to Western Maryland. And you can sort of read through here some of the great work. In Western Maryland, the Mountain Laurel Medical Center plans to use its $35,000 grant to launch the Western Maryland Fresh Food Initiative in partnership with Garrett Growers Cooperative. The Real Food for Kids received a $23,000 grant to help alleviate nutrition insecurity in Prince George's County through its Connecting Farms to School program. And then the Enoch Pratt Free Library received a $12,000 grant to launch the Enoch Pratt Free Library Community Refrigerators Project, which aims to distribute 2,000 pounds of food each month in 3 different locations. Next slide, please. Our Farmers Market Nutrition Program. We have a number of small farmers and producers that participate in this program. At the FMNP program is a USDA-funded nutrition program that's administered by MDA in conjunction with our partners at the Maryland Department of Health and the Maryland Department of Aging. Next slide, please. This slide, we have some additional information on the 2024 impact of our FMNP program. Thank you. And then finally, before I turn it over to Hans, I wanted to discuss the Resilient Food Systems Infrastructure Program, or as we refer to, RFSI. The purpose of the RFSI program is to build resilience in the middle of the food supply chain. We have a cooperative agreement with the USDA for $3.8 million to implement this grant. As you can see towards the bottom of this slide, we conducted a statewide outreach through a priority identification survey and virtual outreach meetings to develop funding priorities for the program. And those 5 priorities are listed there on the slide. Next slide, Andrew. We had 50 applicants that requested over $18 million in funding. And we only received $3.8 million in funding. So there was a huge ask. We had 25 applicants that have been recommended to receive funding by USDA. And just to note that all 25 applicants are either small, minority, or women-owned businesses in agriculture. And as I mentioned when I started my portion of the presentation, I really wanted to highlight for the committee that these are just a few of the programs we have here at the Maryland Department of Agriculture to support small, minority, and women-owned businesses in agriculture. And now I'll turn it over to Hans.
Well, good morning. I'm Hans Schmidt. I'm the Assistant Secretary for Resource Conservation. Cassie just talked about, making sure that we have the resources, the funding resources and so forth, that folks in Maryland have access to purchasing or receiving healthy food for their daily meals and so forth. we've received over the last few years a tremendous need and tremendous request from farmers in these urban areas that want to grow food in their particular areas to meet the needs within their local communities. So we started the Small Farm and Urban Agricultural Program to provide some financial assistance to those individuals in those urban areas, suburban areas, to increase community access to healthy foods for our farmers. And as we have gone through the state into these areas to really understand what their needs are, it's very, very different than from the larger, more traditional farmers that we meet in the rural settings. And so it's been a learning experience, but we've developed this program to help those young farmers, to help those urban farmers help them grow their business so that they can provide these foods for their local communities. Next slide, Andrew. So the first program that we actually introduced, many of you are probably familiar with the Maryland Cover Crop Program. As you've heard probably Secretary Addix speak many times about growing healthy foods, you need to have healthy soils. And in a lot of these areas, one of the best practices to helping to build healthy soils is through cover crops. And so we developed a small acreage cover crop program, a program that farmers can use. It gives them some flexibility on the types of cover crops they want to grow. Their seasons are somewhat different in working with greenhouses. So it gives them a lot of flexibility as far as whether it's a summer cover crop or a winter cover crop. It's their choice, but they can provide us the receipts for the seed that they use, and they can grow cover crops for their next cash crop. And we've seen through the applications that we have received or we have awarded, 56% of our applicants are considered socially or disadvantaged farmers. Next slide. Another program that we have started more recently through through legislation is our small urban agricultural water and power infrastructure grant program. And through this program, farmers, when they're trying to grow crops, particularly in greenhouses or in their areas, they need access to water. They need access to electric. And when you have to hook up to the metropolitan public utility system, it's quite expensive. So we developed this program providing funding for these farmers that they can have access and can hook up to the public utility system. These grants can help provide for water meters, water pipes, irrigation hose, electric meters, and agricultural lines. And we found since July of last year, 71% of our applicants are considered socially and disadvantaged farmers. Through that program, so far since July of 2023, we've had 9 applications. 4 of those applications that are completed. I believe 2 are in Baltimore City, 1 in Montgomery County, and I believe the 4th application was in Anne Arundel County. But again, these are programs that can help our farmers in areas where access to fresh food may be limited. So it gives them the opportunity to provide those fresh fruits and vegetables to those local communities. And I believe that's my last slide. So thank you very much.
We're happy to take questions from the committee or staff. And
wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary and team at MDA. Senator Galliant.
Thank you, both Madam Chairs. One question I had, I know recently in the last few years, we passed legislation to add a position at MDA to help farmers with processing, kind of to cut through some red tape with the butcher. It really came out during COVID, especially the issues we had with local butcher facilities, the lack of those. I know in my district, recently there was a fire there at Gavinell, so that even put more of a pinch. So can you tell us about that position and how that's working, and that kind of give us an update on how that's working out?
And thank you for the question. The position has a person who has a name now. Happy to have Martin Prue, who joined us from Charles County. He was the Ag Economic Development Director in Charles County and has joined us and has been incredible in his role so far. He is not only working with farmers, so farmers and processors who are looking to get into a value-added industry of some kind. But also he's taking the tact of working with county health officials, county environment officials, state health and environment officials, where most of the permitting resides. And we have heard for years how difficult it can be to open up a meat processing facility or a cannery, or if I just want to dry herbs at home to make tea out of, it can almost be, it has been prohibitive. And so people have, in the case of cheese, have sent their milk to Pennsylvania to be processed into cheese and then end up having to buy back their cheese to sell in their own farm. So that happens with cheese and ice cream and meat processing and on and on and on. So you'll see a report which I believe has already been sent to the General Assembly on the status of that position and the progress that's been made. Martin is also training all county economic development officials. So anyone who might catch word that a new business like this is interested, or that a farmer may be interested in jumping into the business, and quickly getting them to us so that we can act as a navigator to walk them through the permitting process, so we never again have an instance where someone has to leave the state or doesn't pursue the opportunity because of our regulations in the state. So I told Martin, his top charge is that no is not an answer. And so it's nice to have someone who's essentially an ombudsman within the department, within the state agency apparatus, to be able to have those conversations internally with health and environment and whoever it might be that may just instinctually, not poorly intended, but may just instinctually say, this is a really difficult project. I don't know how to help you. We now have someone who can help them.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And as you know, I formerly worked at the county level trying to help people navigate through a lot of those that kind of bureaucracies and red tape. So I'm very pleased to hear that. We talked a little bit about it, but I think that's a worthwhile position. And, it helps, as we talk about ag preservation and trying to keep open space open. I've heard this from some old farmers in my area that, the best ag preservation program that you could possibly have is farmers being able to be successful and make money. So
Profit,
I think we need to keep that in mind. We're talking about different ways we're going to, try to preserve ground, but for farmers to be successful is the best ag preservation program out there. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I could not agree more. Mr. Secretary, can you speak a little bit, knowing that we're going to have a bit of some more difficult budget years moving forward than we've had in the past? What keeps you up at night about MALF, but also about your other preservation and to Senator Gallian's point, your other programs that support agriculture broadly?
Well, I'll just be frank, since the question was asked. That what keeps us up most at night is making sure that we're able to maintain functionality within the department. We play a dual role of regulating and promoting an industry. The promotion side has never had a lot of money, so we have to be quite ingenious and rely heavily on social media and other things to help promote. And we rely on grants. We have repurposed a position to hire a grant coordinator. So we now have someone full-time at MDA who is out there trying to seek federal money, knowing that we may not always be able to rely on state funds for some of these new and innovative projects, or at least not to the levels that we think could be most productive. But what keeps us up most at night is making sure that we've got our already extremely lean team intact, to make sure that we've got folks to answer the phones and the emails and the texts when issues arise. So many of our programs are essential. When you think about animal health, for example, and food quality assurance, and mosquito control when we have a case of malaria or West Nile, we're the ones that respond to that. We respond to the bugs and the quarantines and everything else. Avian influenza is another one where we can't not have a strike team ready at a moment's notice to manage what may come. So that's what keeps me up at night. Obviously, in a great budget year, more funding for some of our most successful programs or innovative programs is welcome. In the leanest of years, making sure that we still can maintain the team.
Thank you for your candor. Okay, seeing no further questions and about 16 minutes to go. Madam Secretary, thank you so much for your patience, and do not mean to shorten your presentation whatsoever, but I appreciate you sticking around, and hopefully you can help close us out before we start our broader discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. Actually, we all work together, so it's always interesting to me to hear and work with my colleagues here. So before I jump into the metrics, which are a big part of what we do in mapping, I just want to holistically, as part of this wrap up, I think also just mention the fact that, as we're trying to meet our goals, how do we also grow the economy? How do we balance competing interest? These are all part of where planning, I think, plays a role beyond just giving you the metrics we have today. And a lot of that is through this, I think of it as an integrator role, working across the agencies and really trying to really look at future land use and growth policies and trends, and how do we balance all of that? So that's a lot of what we're looking at right now. And that is a lot of what I'm playing catch up on right now. Is a lot of that analysis and mapping has fallen behind over the years. And so I think we can be doing more to inform how we think about growth and development, and to actually avoid, and support the 2040 goals. So let me just jump into the data that we do have for you today. And I think some of it comes out of that. Thanks, Andrew. So one of the assignments that we have been given as the newly renamed, because one of the legislative items last year was to update and rename what was the Smart Growth Subcabinet to now officially, as of October 1st, will be the Sustainable Growth Subcabinet. So one of our tasks and beauty of that subcabinet is that we do have 15 agencies coming together with secretaries for that cross-disciplinary, cross-agency work, to be looking at all aspects of this type of work. And one of our assignments was specifically the Maryland the Beautiful Act and the plan that was in fact reviewed and approved by the subcabinet and published as per the statute. And we currently have a draft report, which will be the annual report that we are providing comments on. Obviously, DNR has taken very much the lead on that, but we do have a working group that's a subset of the subcabinet at our coordinating committee level that's been engaged in all of this also. So you will be receiving that report, the annual report, because it was our first year with the plan. There's a lot more to come, and a lot more meat will be in that as we move forward. So that is one aspect of the Sustainable Growth Subcabinet and our role there. But I would just really, as we've tried to reactivate the subcabinet and use it in a more effective way, I think it is a perfect forum to be discussing some of these competing issues, almost, of what we're trying to accomplish, around climate and preservation and density and growth, and all of these things really come together around that subcabinet. So it's a great forum for that. Next slide. As it was already mentioned, Secretary Kurtz, I think, already covered this to some degree in terms of the numbers. And yes, yay, thank you. All team effort, great work, everyone, about meeting that 2030 goal early. But the next 10% is going to be extremely difficult. You can see some of the numbers here. Basically, the calculus at the very bottom bullet shows what we would need to do annually over the next 16 years in terms of acreage to reach that 2040 goal. Another reason I think it's going to be difficult, because it's going to be related to how do we use the land that is developed land to the most optimal, best way possible. One of the things I know from our vantage point to be advocating is optimizing previously developed and developed land. I mean, it relates to the priority funding areas, but it's also gets back to zoning and comprehensive plans and sort of how do we ensure that the land that we do have targeted for development is optimized and used in the best possible way. And I think there's that lens and aspect towards contributing towards this 2040 goal also, so that we relieve some of the pressure. Great point, to the extent that farmers are successful, I think they themselves will help with that, but we also have to relieve it on both ends. So I just wanted to mention that as part of getting to that next big hurdle we have. There's a lot of different aspects to getting there. The farm side of this, in terms of the agricultural side, the metrics that we track, we use an amazing, I'm very proud of my geospatial analysis team and our data team in terms of the work they do. And I do want to emphasize the dashboard here. I tried the link, it's not working at this moment, but please do, everyone, take a moment and go to that dashboard. You can see the breakdowns by, areas of sort of where we hitting these marks and by what program. Actually gives you a fairly good breakdown for that. So you can really get a sense of, for instance, the mouth program is right behind the DNR state inventory, and there it is there. It's also visually presented in the dashboard of how we are sort of doing in terms of meeting this goal. And, and at 87%, I think we're good. We're on a good target to meet the 2030 goal as it relates to agriculture land preserved. And so that's the other metric that we really wanted to share with you here today, is to give you a sense of, as our governor says, we're data driven. So if we have the data, it helps keep us tracking and understanding where do we need to get to, how are we going to get there, and what are the most effective mechanisms for getting there. And so that's my primary focus being here with you today, is to just share some of those numbers. I have Chuck Boyd on the phone also for any questions you may have about the details, but I also want to keep this notion of the bigger picture in mind of how we think about growth and development and land use decisions as part of the equation here also. So I'll stop there and available for any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Madam Secretary, and appreciate the data-driven approach as always. I know you're a small but mighty team over at Department of Planning.
Thank you. We are. Thank you.
Questions for Department of Planning and the Secretary?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Senate Chair. Quick question, if I may, for Secretary Flora. Thanks for your great report. I'm curious, because I'd love to visit the protected lands dashboard. You said the site was down.
Yeah, the site is up. It was the hot link that wasn't working.
Oh,
the site works.
Okay.
I was just saying that if you try to click, it didn't carry over in the PDF.
No worries. Sometimes the hyperlinks are funny that way. Okay.
Yeah,
but
visiting. no, the site is working, and I would really encourage you to take a look at it. It's just kind of interesting to see how that relates in terms of the mapping on there of the priority funding areas and the mapping across the state of those different protected and conservation areas, to give you a sense of where those concentrations, visuals, taking all that data and put it into a visual for the state, I always find extremely helpful, I think, as most people do. And it's obviously—
a picture's worth 1,000 words.
Yeah, that's a public tool, which makes that great too. Oh, thank you.
There we go.
Thanks for bringing
Fabulous.
that up. Appreciate that.
Thank you. So, Madam Secretary, I do have one more quick question.
Yes.
You referred to the value of planning in economic development. And I wonder if you could help us say a little bit more about that with regard to our parks. As we're looking here in Baltimore City at the opportunity to transform Glens Falls Lincoln Park into a state partnership, we are super excited about not only the public health value, the social value of that park coming online, but we're also really interested in the potential catalytic economic value that park may have. Can you help us start thinking about that and what we might do going forward to ensure we're reaping the full benefit?
Yes, thank you for asking that question. It's been, widely documented that access to, those types of green spaces actually, and this is where we also have to be careful in terms of populations, that we want to have access and not be driven out, but it definitely increases property values, makes more marketability of properties. I mean, to the extent that, particularly in urban areas, which I've done a lot of work with in the past, I mean, to the extent, whether it be, your trail systems throughout urban areas or your pocket parks even, or even more larger concentrated areas, absolutely provide an economic benefit in multiple ways. And there's been a lot of study and research on that. I think the key will be, really working with the community, obviously, really understanding, I think as Secretary Kurtz mentioned earlier, is how do we provide those connections, maintenance, ensuring, how the space is activated. Activation of space is a really major issue around these types of more urban public park type areas in terms of how do you ensure that there's a programming element of those spaces, because that's really a lot of what, particularly in urban areas, I think brings that value add, so to speak. And that's part of a community effort, typically working with the government agencies and others, because you do have the maintenance and the safety and the other aspects of that. But there's a variety of considerations, all of which absolutely can lead to economic benefit, but we do need to think about all of those pieces of the puzzle. Oops, I think you're muted.
I was muted. Thank you. If I may, Madam Senate Chair, is there a way to quantify, or let me put it this way, because I dream big and I often need to be brought back down to earth. So I'd love to know if there's a way to get our arms around the potential quantified economic value of developing Gwynns Falls. And if I may, going even bigger, thinking about the potential for connecting to a regional park system. We've got a really wonderful concept for a Baltimore Greenways Trail rolling out that would connect communities in the city. The Gwynns Falls Trail has a potential, the Gwynns Falls Lincoln Park has a potential, I think, to be part of a bigger regional vision. So help me out with that. Because some people respond to stories about public health and trees, and other people respond to, they get inspired and activated by dollar signs. So
yeah. Well, first of all, I think the best start point is to look at some existing studies that are out there, so you can at least have some baseline model data of how that has been modeled in other places. And I know those exist. We could do a quick search and find a couple of those studies, because that gives you a sort of just a general sense. But those types of studies have been done in areas. They can be done. They don't, you can do obviously all extremes of doing those types of things, and there's a lot of variables and dependence in terms of getting a data output that you feel reasonably reliable in terms of the multiplier benefit of that type of activity. And then I just need to continue to emphasize is that you can build these spaces, but all of those things like connectivity, activation, all of the other factors will include, those variables will affect that economic model. And so you have to, ensure that you have those variables in place. But we could take a look at the existing studies that I know, Trust for Public Land, there's a variety of groups that have done those types of analysis. The other thing in terms of the analysis, which I was just on another phone call before this one, is the whole ecosystem services analysis, which in terms of, we often undervalue because people don't put the economic monetization aspect in play around what we'll call just generically these green spaces. There is a massive amount of ecosystem services and valuation on that I think as we look at program open space and its broader value could be brought to bear also, in addition to, the specific specific park that you're looking at. And so I would start with, let's get you a couple of studies that have been done on other spaces like that, that at least gives you an example of how that's been done. And then start there. And then you could be thinking about whether or not you might want to bring in, and I wouldn't go overboard on this, but at least a consultant to do some of that analysis, because it might help you. It would also help you potentially with fundraising. I've also learned over the years that a lot of times if you can show that bigger picture and outcome, it can help with that aspect of things too. So obviously I could go deeper on this, but hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you so much. Madam Senate Chair, could I take maybe 40 more seconds?
Court.
Okay, thank you. I'm on the subject of the Gwynns Falls Partnership Park. Again, I think there are so many wonderful initiatives and programs underway in Maryland in all three of the agencies we've spoken with today, or four, and you guys are amazing. But I want to circle back to DNR, if I may, on the subject of the Gwynns Falls Partnership Park, because I am obsessed and I see the team is there. And I hope you won't mind one last question. So 2 weeks ago, I was invited to tour Gwynns Falls Leakin Park by the Friends of Gwynns Falls Leakin Park. I got a hands-on, a private walking tour, about 3 hours, visiting some of the highlights, some of the structures that still exist, like the Ben Cardin Pavilion and other locations. It was fantastic. I've lived in Baltimore 25 years. It's shocking, but true. And I've never really explored that park. It's an unrecognized diamond in our state. And I look forward to seeing all the good things we can do as the legislation that we passed gets implemented. So for Secretary Kurtz and his team, before we go, I'd love to hear a little bit more detail about your expectations, and the timeline would be super helpful to know when all of the community engagement activities will actually take place. Understanding these things take time, but it would be so encouraging to hear a little bit more detail about your expectations, and I'd like to also know how I could be helpful. Thank you.
Yep. So I think the most important date right now is the December 1, 2025 date, which is when the report is going to be due. And so right now, what we're doing is working really closely with the city. Our parks director and the director of Rec and Parks for Baltimore City have been meeting regularly to go over several of the things that you actually just brought up. The buildings, especially, the structures, the existing partners. The Outward Bound School is there, which is a really fantastic organization, a strong partner of DNR's and the city's. And there are several other community groups that either have regularly occurring programming that goes there, whether it be formal or informal. And so we're starting with getting our hands around the many partners, not just the Friends group, they're an incredibly important partner, but the many organizations that that feel very, very connected to Gwynns Falls and Leakin Park. And I think, so that part is really important. And I think in our conversations with the city, this was the thing we want to make sure that we do really well and really detailed. And that is provide those opportunities for engagement with the surrounding communities. I think there has been a sense, from our conversations with many community groups already, that it has been neglected. It has not been promoted as the incredible resource it is for the city and for the state. And I think what we want to make sure is that we are building out a plan and a strategy that brings them and that gives them that continued feeling of ownership and engagement with the park as we build it out. We don't want to come in and say we should do this and that and this. We want to hear what's the community doing right now? How do we build around that existing park structure? And I think that's also important for our partnership with the city. So over the next year, the focus is very much going to be those community by community charrettes and listening sessions. And I think having yourself and your colleagues help us promote those, get people to come and attend, and direct us to other constituencies that maybe we don't know, frankly. I think Baltimore City has the Parks Department has a very good handle on that. But really helping drive that engagement with us as we continue to build this out. And then what that report will highlight is what the strategy would be for co-management. And I think at the end of the day, one of the biggest questions that we have to answer for ourselves for together is the ownership piece. Several of the funding sources that we have, we can only spend on state-owned properties. So I think that's going to be a question. Baltimore City owns the property now. And so how could we maybe be more flexible with some of these funding sources to support some of that management if the state isn't going to be an owner, or if it's an ownership share? I mean, all of those kind of nuts and bolts things will need to work out with the city. But I think we all agree that the most important part is starting with that community engagement and the charrette process. So we're building that partnership out and that management structure out around what the community wants and needs.
Wonderful, thank you. What you guys are doing in partnership with the city and all of the communities is groundbreaking. This is going to be a story that will be told nationally, so we'll continue supporting your work, and thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Senate Chair.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, we have moved into the discussion portion of this agenda, and fully appreciating that we are over time and now are on borrowed time from everybody. But please, members of the Joint Committee, chime in if you have follow-up work that you would like our three wonderful secretaries and their teams to prepare for our December 11th meeting. This is the time. Okay, seeing none, reminder that we're back at it for our December 11th meeting. Again, as folks are beginning to think about January, I know the departments are, and I believe you'll be in a better position to maybe share some of your work about the upcoming legislative session with us in December. So I think it'll be a robust conversation going from 30,000 foot to what isn't on our plates come session time. So thank you all for being here with us. Madam House Chair, any closing thoughts?
Just thank you to DNR, Planning, and Agriculture, your secretaries, and for all your leadership. And I'm super excited to be on this joint committee, so to be a witness and a supporter for the work you do. Thank you, Madam Senate Chair.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you to our wonderful staff at DLS for making all this happen, and we'll see everybody soon. Thank you.
Take care.